it's who is it for? Like, who is it for? I guess that's kind of the key question in this episode is, why are you doing it? Are you doing it for yourself, or are you doing it for someone else? And it's totally fine if you're doing it for yourself, but don't say that you're doing it for someone else if that's not actually the case, if that person is not asking for that.
Said I'm all about it. Yeah, I'm all about it. Said I'm all about it. Yeah, 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 yeah. Said I'm all about it. Yeah, I'm all about it. Said I'm all about it. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Hello, and welcome to Two Women Yelling About Knitting, a show that is not about what we're buying or what we're making, but instead asks questions like, is knitting that red hat political, performative, or both? This is a space where we look up from our works in progress and acquisitions and talk about what we see in the wider world of knitting, its political, social, and historical context. But don't worry, it'll be fun. I'm Anjali, and I'm a knitter living in Denver, Colorado.
I'm Allison, and I am a knitter living outside of Washington, D.C. We're friends who share a love of knitting as well as an interest in a lot of sticky topics that relate to knitting, things like politics, mental health, intellectual property, and more. We're recording another 6-episode season with a new episode and a new topic every 3 weeks. If you want to join us on this journey, hit the subscribe button to follow along.
So, Allison, my first question for you is, have you ever been elected to a position? Any position?
So when I saw this initially in the show notes, I thought, no, I truly haven't. And then I remembered that at my high school graduation, they announced that we had voted, I guess I forgot this part, that we had voted on who should be the alumni class representatives to be in charge of tracking people down and asking them what they were doing with their lives so that we could share it with each other later down the road.
Sounds like something you would love doing. Why do you think they chose you?
Because I'm organized. I'm organized on behalf of other people, less so in my own life. I think because I'm organized, and I had also gone to this school for a very long time, so I actually truly don't know. I was not the most popular person in my high school class or anything, but it was also a very small school, so like everyone kind of knew each other. Anyway, so I was in that role for a pretty short amount of time, and then I had to start traveling a lot for work, and I wrote the alumni office, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. Somebody else did it. But I guess I was voted by popular consent to this position. How about you, Anjali?
The one I was thinking about where I feel like I really did have an impact was I went to film school for my undergraduate degree, and there's like a big film project that you do at your junior and then senior year, and you have to first be on a crew, and then you can direct your own film the next year if you're picked by the committee. So after I was on the crew, I didn't want to direct, but I volunteered to potentially be one of the people on the committee, so kind of with the faculty picking the projects for the following year. And because I had been on a really terrible project, and I was like, why was this picked? This is not good. A few other people also volunteered. They all were people that were more well-known than me, and so I just assumed like, oh, I'm probably not going to get it. We had to leave the room while they took the vote, and then I came back in, and this guy who had been on my crew was like, oh man, everybody wanted you, Anjali. And I assumed he was being sarcastic, but I was picked, and I guess it was because a lot of the people that I felt were more popular, well-known, were not actually well-liked or trusted. So I ended up serving on this committee. Yeah.
That summarizes our extensive political experience in elected office. I think politics are very much on my mind a lot of the time, whether or not I want them to be, because they are so built into the daily lives of like everyone who lives around me.
Politics is like a lever for change for the work that I do. So I'm excited to talk about its role in knitting, how knitting and politics have intersected over the years.
It's a huge topic, and we agreed we could talk about this for a very long time. And so what we like to do is kind of focus in. It's like, here's maybe a microcosm, or here are a few things to touch on thematically within this much larger question. First of all, the act of knitting itself as political, or the act of fiber arts themselves as political, not necessarily what you produce, but just the act of doing it. There's also politics within the knitting world. So political debate, political fighting among knitters or within knitting. For example, the ban on Trump and MAGA items patterns from Ravelry in 2019. And then there was certainly an uproar about that. And then the third piece, which is mostly what we're going to focus on today, is the idea of knitted items as political statements. So just kind of thinking about, there are so many different ways that knitting and politics intersect, and to acknowledge that we're kind of focusing in on the knitted items themselves.
And just so you know, pretty much every topic we talk about on this show could be like a Ken Burns style series where we
25-part PBS documentary.
Yeah. So we always have to kind of focus down, and that's where we're focusing today. So there is, and actually some of our viewers have brought up in past episodes, the kind of historical ways that knitting has shown up in the world of politics and political fights. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, Allison.
So this idea of fiber arts themselves, the act of fiber arts being the political statement or protest. We have talked in the past about the age of homespun, and the idea of spinning your own fiber was big during like the American Revolution as a way of separating the American colonists from their British political ties and being like, we don't need to rely on importing British cloth. We will make our own, and that will be part of how we separate ourselves, get out from under British rule. Also, and then this is the one that a reader had pointed out. This is the one a viewer had pointed out, a listener.
You're not reading this podcast right now?
It was on YouTube, so I guess it was a viewer, pointed out Gandhi's use of fiber arts in his movement to remove British colonial power from India. And his promotion, or he promoted the art of hand spinning as well, specifically like drop spindles, I think. And again, it was this idea that we, by being self-sufficient, that will help us better and perhaps more quickly emancipate ourselves from colonial rule.
Hearing about both of these are just making me think about, there was a little bit of hubbub on YouTube last year that like, oh, tariffs aren't political. Some podcasters were claiming that tariffs aren't political, but clearly like tariffs are a way to bluntly try to create self-sufficiency and reliance on outside imports. And obviously, we're seeing these aren't tariffs that you're talking about, but like trying to create an environment of self-sufficiency around fiber arts is and has been a political tool.
Yeah, and still is. I mean, certainly so many prices for like local yarn stores, and everybody's prices have gone up because of these tariffs. So yeah, and that, again, that intersection of that piece of capitalism as well, which obviously is also politics. In terms of knitted items being symbols of political protest, so some ones that are, worth mentioning, there was the tank blanket in Denmark, which was a fiber artist, Marianne Jørgensen. It was her way of protesting Denmark's support of the Iraq War in the early 2000s. I had forgotten about this one, but the Bernie mittens that Bernie Sanders wore to the inauguration, and that very famous picture of him sitting, and they were knitted by one of his constituents, and that was a pattern you could get on Ravelry. And again, it's like simply by nature of this person wearing this pattern, it is imbued with this political meaning. Unlike some of these other things that we're going to talk about that are created in this political sense, this was actually an item that didn't have a political context behind it, but by virtue of being tied to Bernie Sanders, took on a political meaning, which is, again, just an interesting subtle distinction. The item that I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about is also a red hat, which today's red hat is why we wanted to do this episode. And this is actually a red hat from the late 18th century from the French Revolution. So there was a group of women during the French Revolution called the, pardon my French pronunciation, tricoteuses, from the French verb tricot, which means to knit. And the tricoteuses was a group of women of the working class who would knit throughout important moments of the French Revolution, Jacobin political meetings, that being the largest kind of political group of revolutionists, even supposedly knitting next to the guillotine, a specific tricoteuse who is immortalized, a fictional one, but as a symbol of that movement is in Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. Madame Defarge is her name, and she sits by the guillotine knitting while people are beheaded, and also like knitting the names in code into her work of like the next people who will be beheaded.
Were they knitting to make a specific statement, or were they knitting because they had to knit because they needed to keep knitting for like to make money, or why? What was the knitting?
In my understanding of it, in the Charles Dickens version, it has this like political symbolist meaning of like knitting people's names into it, but that is not like historically accurate. It's literally like, gotta make some socks, gotta go to this meeting. Like, I'm gonna do both. Contemporary craftist politics has interesting class undertones to it in terms of who is privileged enough to have the time to do this. Whereas in this setting, it wasn't that they were knitting as a political act. They were being political while knitting. There was a red hat that was, in fact, a symbolic knitted item. So the Phrygian cap was adopted in the French Revolution as a symbol for the uprising lower classes. Actually, its background comes from ancient Rome. It was a hat that was worn by formerly enslaved people who had been emancipated. So this particular hat, red hat, took on this political significance as a symbol of the lower classes freeing themselves from the rule of the upper classes in the French Revolution. There's a long history of knitted item, hats in particular, having a kind of political symbolic meaning to them. Which brings us to the two examples of the 21st century, A Tale of Two Hats. And it was A Tale of Two Cities with Madame Defarge. Who knew that was going to happen? Yeah.
But actually, now it's A Tale of Three Hats, this episode.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Just keep adding them on.
So for, I think, a lot of knitters watching this, and even non-knitters, maybe the most recognizable or memorable knitted hat associated with a political movement is what we are going to call the pink kitty hat, because we are unsure if
we would not like to be shut down by YouTube.
Yes, will cause
for explicit content.
Yes. The pink kitty hat was created by the artists Jana Zweiman and a screenwriter named Krista Suh in 2016 as a symbol of resistance to the election of Trump. And we'll put up a picture. I'm sure you know what this hat looks like, but it was specifically in reference to the statements that Trump had been caught on tape saying about how you could just grab women by their genitals and no one would worry about it. It was just fine. So it was kind of commenting on that and was this bright pink color. I never knit one. Did you ever knit one?
Neither did I. No.
Yeah. It was kind of a clever shape that was like a square, and so when you put it on your head, the middle came down and it looked like two ears. So kind of interesting construction. And you'll probably remember that it was worn by tens of thousands of people, mostly women, who marched in the January 2017 Women's March. So the discourse around the hat, like in the moment and right after, was very positive in the media. And the hat was, according to people who wore them and were part of these marches, it was very inspiring to see so many people wearing the hats. I myself marched in a women's march, the one in New Orleans. Did you?
So did I.
Oh, okay. Did we go together? Yeah. I don't remember.
I think I went with somebody. I remember I went with somebody else.
Yeah, so we were both at the march in New Orleans. I don't recall like a ton of hats. I also wasn't knitting at that time.
Exactly,
so.
And that's what's interesting. It's like I wasn't knitting very much. And I don't recall as many hats, maybe because it was like 80 degrees probably.
Yeah.
A, but B, it wasn't really on my radar.
But looking back at the media from that time, it's interesting to see that within a year, so by the time the second Women's March came around, the hats were really being openly criticized for being exclusionary, specifically to trans people, because the kind of implicit assumption that in order to be considered a woman, you have to have a kitty, and also exclusionary to women of color, because you're saying that it has to be a pink kitty. Not that it has to, but just the assumption that like this pink kitty symbol will bring all women together was not actually true. People were saying it. They were also criticizing that the hat and its color perpetuated stereotypes about women, that maybe women are defined by the color pink or by our genitalia. So I'll link to some resources below, but some of the criticism were, there was an article in Self magazine, Not My Kitty Hat, Why I Didn't Participate in the Women's March This Year. And the subheader was, as a Black woman, I implore you to please keep your kitty hats off my feminism. This author's point was just that this hat and the people who were taking part in the making and wearing of these hats were not actually thinking intersectionally about the issues that the Women's March was ostensibly about, and that there were a lot of people who were feeling excluded just by the symbol of this hat. And then even last year, I saw a Reddit thread in 2025 on the knitting subreddit. The headline was, anyone else planning on knitting a kitty hat like everyone did years ago? And then it was edited to add, like, edit. Apparently, kitty hats are now kind of cringy. I regret being late to the feminist game. I was still a kid back in 2017. Taking suggestions for other feminist knits. So obviously this hat has a lot of deep and resonating feelings. So I did end up finding a paper from a journal called Fashion and Textiles, and this paper was published in October of 2020, and it's called Unifying Yet Dividing: Voices of Kitty Hat Maker-Wearers Who Participated in the 2017 Women's Marches. So these researchers collected 511 surveys between February 24th and April 10th of 2017. So I think those dates are important because those dates are pretty close to the actual first Women's March event. And as we discussed earlier, at that point in time, feelings were still pretty positive about the hat. What the researchers wanted to explore in this survey and in this paper were craftivism, the unifying and dividing aspects of kitty hat craftivism, and also specifically they were thinking about the theory of Black feminist perspective, that being, you know, the more marginalized your identity is, the better you are able to see the whole. Like the more outside you are, the better you're able to assess kind of the weaknesses of a system. So using that theory, how do we advance the conversation about inclusivity in craftivism?
That's interesting that as you said, this paper comes from a time period when the view was still pretty positive, but it feels like there's already somebody with this critical eye in a formalized sense looking at that piece of it, and that's just interesting to see that so close to the actual event.
Yeah, and they do. I mean, the paper opens up with kind of bringing up these issues of inclusivity and exclusivity, and lays out the Black feminist perspective and how craftivism can sometimes ignore the fact that not everyone has the ability, A, to engage in a craft because they don't have the time and resources to have that kind of hobby, and B, then additionally, like, use those resources to take up activist activities, because not only are you having to have, you know, the supplies and the time and the money to do this, now you're doing it for a reason that isn't exclusively to like clothe your body or clothe the bodies of your loved ones.
Which is interesting just to think about, you know, the previous examples we gave where craftivism, which before the term craftivism was invented, but a similar idea being a tool of not the upper classes, but the people who are in active rebellion. And now the tables have turned. It is this like tool associated with, as we'll talk about, more like highly educated white people. As we've talked about in the past with knitting and gender, and just the history of knitting going from a necessity, and especially for those who didn't have the money to buy their own items, to being a luxury hobby. That kind of timeline is a parallel to that difference in craftivism and class and race and association. Maybe class association, less so race.
So these researchers kind of divided the survey respondents up into different groups, and the main group that they were interested in were what they called maker wearers. So people that were both making hats and then also wore them themselves. Because some people made them but didn't wear them. Some people wore them but didn't make them. And then there are these maker wearers who both wore them and made them. The demographics of that group might not be too surprising. They were overwhelmingly white, so 78% of them were white, also highly educated. 89% had bachelor's degrees and 58% had graduate degrees, and heterosexual, so 93% of them were heterosexual. So these maker wearers, when they were asked about kind of the significance of the hat to them wearing it and making it, they pointed to it wasn't just the hat itself, it was also the craft work that the hat represented, and that the things that they said about the act of making these hats, that they were expressing caregiving and nurturing through their craftivism. And I definitely see that today in the next hat we're going to talk about, the Melt the Ice hat, that people who are making them, it comes from an act of care. Would you say that you also see that around you?
Yeah, absolutely. The impulse behind them is from a place of wanting to get involved, wanting to be visible about being involved, and thinking that it is a useful tool in that way.
Yeah, and in a time when we are consumers for the most part, just consuming, it can be empowering to craft something, make it with your own two hands, and to give it to someone else. You know, that is kind of at the center of all knitting that we do, and it's like an act of care. So those attitudes definitely came across in this survey. But I wanted to highlight something that I thought was interesting, that I think gets to the cringe aspect, or just the kind of maybe dismissiveness that the kitty hat can have, especially from knitters of color or knitters who come from other marginalized groups. So one woman they surveyed said, "I wear it to keep warm and to show others my political leanings, that I am a white woman who did not vote for Trump." So I think that's a really key issue here, that for some maker wearers, the hat is a really important symbol that they are telling others, to let others know, like, I may look like this one thing, but I'm not inside. Like, please understand that I'm not, and I don't support this. It's kind of like that safety pin trend. Do you remember that? Where you're supposed to wear a safety pin to show that you are a safe person. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that also became very quickly like, don't do that. That's just kind of embarrassing. Do you have any thoughts about these from your perspective?
I think I'm interested in this idea of like cringe and embarrassment. Cringe and embarrassment imply like, oh, this is really awkward, versus like, this is offensive. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I think that's my issue.
Yeah. And I think I come from it, from the perspective of someone who is Asian American. And if I saw someone trying to project to me, you know, it's COVID, Kung flu, like there's terrible like anti-Asian racism happening, and someone is like wearing a pin to tell me that they're a safe person, I'm just like, what? No, just be a good person. Just talk to me like a human being. You don't need to
But so project. Does wearing the pin negate that? If the person does both, does the performative act then negate the true act?
The performative act makes me question their motives, I guess. So something I wrote about, and maybe I'll link to it in the show notes because I think it's relevant, is people who want the anti-racism cookie. And this is something that my old boss used to talk about.
Wait, this is not a literal cookie. This is metaphor.
No, not a literal.
Okay. I'm like,
But
wait,
you're
is there
like,
an anti-racism
you're
again?
like, you want the person who you're trying to impress or like get into the good graces of, whether that's like a person of color, like a trans person, like the person you want to tell them, you're wearing your hat. You want them to know, like, I didn't vote for Trump. I believe in you. And what is it that you want from that person? You want their approval? Do you want them to notice and say, like, oh, thank you for wearing that safety pin? Like, to me, that's what that is suggesting, is that you want that cookie. You want the world's acknowledgement that you are doing the right thing, instead of just being a person who's doing the right thing and moving through the world. To me, there's like something about it that lacks confidence in your convictions, that you can't just be that or do that and instead have to project and perform that.
Okay.
Yeah.
What my alternative question is, where is it like, is there any acceptable, visible projection of any sort of allyship?
Of course. Yeah.
Like what?
Like, I have a t-shirt from a organization in New Orleans that's led by Black formerly incarcerated people that like helps with the criminal justice system. So maybe if I was attending an event that was about like the criminal justice system, I would wear that t-shirt that I got because I donated to them. I don't know. Like, I don't think there's anything performative about that, but that is coming from like kind of deep involvement with that group, being involved with their different like phone banking and things like that. So, I mean, that's showing allyship without calling attention to myself. Like, I don't think there was anyone who was like, I need to have like a physical symbol so that I know that you're a safe person. Like, people of color have been moving through the world, interacting with white people, especially like Black and Indigenous people, like long before Donald Trump happened and when it was not safe. People have their own means of surviving and moving through that world, and have not needed to have a safety pin to tell them that someone is a safe person or not. And so it's, who is it for? Like, who is it for? I guess that's kind of the key question in this episode, is why are you doing it? Are you doing it for yourself, or are you doing it for someone else? And it's totally fine if you're doing it for yourself, but don't say that you're doing it for someone else if that's not actually the case, if that person is not asking for that. And I'm not here to be like, I'm not here to give anyone the cookie. Like, do whatever you want. I'm just telling people my personal viewpoint. I would be interested if there are viewers from marginalized backgrounds who are watching this. What has been your experience? Like, what do you think? And on that topic, like, to get back to the survey, basically...
Oh my gosh, yeah, we didn't even get that, sorry.
Basically, only a very small percentage, 2.5%, identified the hat as a symbol that marginalized women of color and trans people. But again, as we discussed, like, the vast majority of the people that they surveyed who wore the hats or made the hats, and not everyone they surveyed wore the hats, but the vast majority of people that they talked to were part of this white, women, educated, heterosexual group. So some of the criticisms that this 2.5% had, someone said they completely ignored the fact that the overwhelming majority of kitty in the world is not pink. I think the women, mostly white, who wore the hats colluded in racism. Interestingly, the people of color, who were not a very large percentage, they were not more likely to point out racism or marginalization of trans people, but people who were not heterosexual were roughly twice as likely to recognize and mention the potential racism and transphobia symbolized by the hats than those who reported heterosexual identities. So that marginalized group was maybe more aware, maybe because there was something so distinctly cisgender about this particular hat.
So The Pink Kitty hat was 2017. Here we are in 2026 with the hat that inspired this episode, which is there are a number of patterns, but I'd say the most popular one is titled the Melt the Ice hat. So, Anjali, do you want to give us a little bit of background on what the hat is itself, especially if we have viewers who don't know what that is?
There is a yarn shop in Minnesota called Needle and Skein, and they encourage knitters and crocheters to knit this particular red pointed hat with a long tassel. And it was made by Norwegians in the 1940s to protest Nazi occupation, and was eventually kind of like banned, like people weren't allowed to wear the hat. So has a historical symbol of resistance. It's been covered in a lot of media outlets, but the New York Times reported that the hat pattern has been ordered more than 85,000 times since mid-January. And that was a couple weeks ago that statistic came out, so I bet it's even more since then. And the proceeds are going to benefit organizations on the ground in Minnesota. So, of course, all this is coming out of what's happening in Minnesota with ICE shooting and killing 2 people, and a lot of just ICE presence in the city, a lot of protests happening, and things just getting really ramped up. A lot of people who are undocumented, who are hiding at home because they're afraid to leave their homes, and a lot of mobilization on the ground by people in Minneapolis in particular, who are helping to make sure that people have food and know when ICE is in their neighborhood and are alerted to what's happening on the ground. Outside of Minnesota, knitters across the country are taking part by buying this pattern and knitting this hat. And I feel like pretty quickly after this started trending, a backlash started emerging on social media where people were calling the act of knitting the hat performative.
And there was a big callback to the kitty hat as well. People mentioning,
yes,
bringing that up again. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And then you have seen, Allison, and kind of sent me some social media posts about the backlash to the backlash. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and then the backlash to the backlash. People. Which, how many times can we get through? Like, how many iterations can you get? With people pointing out, well, when protests always include an element of performance, and or are we alienating people who could be potential allies by shutting them down at this point of perhaps their first real understanding or interest in these big issues? Which brings you, Anjali, to your experience with thinking about this hat.
Basically, I was like, I don't want to read any of this. I just feel like for my own mental health, I don't want to spend energy on being invested in this online fight, because I think we all know that these types of disagreements are not going to be solved through commenting on somebody's Instagram or someone DMing somebody something and then you do a screenshot of that DM. That's just not a path to understanding and finding common ground and kind of seeing each other as human beings. But I was drawn into this by a friend who unfortunately started this discussion over text, and maybe I should have said, hey, let's sit down and have a conversation and not talk
let's
about
record this and put it on the internet.
Yeah. I want to talk through my true feelings now, because I feel like that might help shed some light on why some people might be feeling ambivalent about the Melt the Ice hat. So this friend is white and from the Midwest, and her point was, I think, a lot of people's point. My point was, first, I don't want to talk about the hat. I don't care. People can have their opinions. The hat is not important to me. I don't want to talk about the hat. I shared some of the posts that I think we'll share down below that I found pretty compelling. I believe her name is Amber from Sized Inclusive Collective. I thought had a really thoughtful post that was just saying the reason why you might see some people being sensitive or feeling negative about the Melt the Ice hat is that maybe they come from communities where people are shot by law enforcement all the time. If you are Black or Indigenous, this is not an unusual occurrence. And there was no outpouring of grief and support over these incidents, even though I mean, everyone acknowledges that Black people are disproportionately killed by law enforcement. And so it feels I think it feels hurtful. It feels maybe like hypocritical to suddenly be like deeply engaged in politics and like using your knitting, like being so passionate about craftivism when there was the opportunity to engage for all this time and you never did. And it's very telling that it was 2 white people who were killed, and then all of a sudden this started happening. And so her point, which I think a lot of people share, is like, well, if the killing of 2 white people is what it takes to get folks like galvanized about this issue, then that's fine. Like they can start wherever they're able to start. And then I just kind of didn't want to get into it anymore with her, but it really started me thinking about like, why is this bothering me so much? Like, why does the hat feel so unimportant to me? And why does she need me to say that the hat is important? Because that seemed to be what the need was. And then is it the cookie? And why do I feel kind of like I'm not able to say how this resonates with me and have my take on it taken seriously? So my basically the end of the day, how I feel about the Melt the Ice hat is people are in real danger, and it's not just people in Minnesota. It's people across the country. It's people here in Denver. It's my boss, who is a citizen, who has been carrying her passport around with her because she is a brown woman and she could be stopped at any time. I don't think that, knitting the Melt the Ice hat and doing more active means of protest are mutually exclusive. I don't think if you're knitting and wearing the hat that you're not doing those other things. But I do feel a lot of the energy around the hat has been focused on the knitting of the hat and not around these other ways that actually are more impactful for the communities that are being targeted by ICE. This article in the New York Times actually had a quote that kind of like exemplified this for me, which is one of the yarn owners that they talked to said,
this is from Needle and Skein or from somewhere else?
No, it's from somewhere else. So this other yarn owner in Minneapolis said, these works can bring comfort to children sheltering inside homes because they and their parents are too scared to step outside. That just makes me roll my eyes. Like, it's one thing to say, knitting this hat makes me feel like I'm doing something. It makes me feel connected to other people out there doing something. It makes me feel less scared. It brings me comfort. I think that is completely valid. Those are completely valid reasons to make the hat. I wanted to help raise money. I wanted to make them for my loved ones. Like, I wanted to keep them warm while they're outside protesting. I think that's all completely valid. But don't tell me it's to help the children who are hiding scared in their homes for the last 60 days, like waiting for food to be delivered. Because I'm sorry, that's like just not the most impactful and important thing that can be happening. And to tell yourself that is just, I think that's what makes it embarrassing, if that is your belief about the ultimate impact of the hat.
I saw it and I was like, and I kind of had the same, it's interesting. I am obviously much more of a knitter now than I was during the kitty hat era, but I wasn't like jumping on the bandwagon to be like, I need to make this hat for myself. It's the same question of like, who is this item? Like, what is this for? I think it's the same thing, my same question to the backlash, where it's like, I understand the perspective of like, we don't need to worry if we make white women feel like they've messed up, but it's like, what is the goal behind the backlash to it? And because I think maybe this is also interesting too, the range of maybe emotion behind the negative response to it was very interesting. There were people who were very, very angry. There were people who, and then the other end of the spectrum, I think I saw something that was more along the lines of like, oh, you're making a red hat, that's great. Here are 25 other things you can do, like a yes and situation. And then more of the middle ground of like, do it or don't do it. And I think my question is two parts. The response, what is the hope? Is the hope that by telling people they shouldn't make it, this is not you, this is like the backlash. I'm just curious what we think the response intention is. Like, what would you like the result to be, A, and is the way that we're responding to it going to get that result? And B, is there an alternative? Like, this is a genuine question and I don't know. And I was trying to do a little research and I couldn't really find anything, but it's like, is there a better option in terms of if I still want craft to be part of my response, right? I think we're all on the same page that just craft is not enough, but it seems like craft and is also not enough. So it's like, well, what is there a way to do the craft piece in a positively?
What if, I have an idea, what if, much like the French tricoteur, I don't remember what they're called, you organized a citywide, wherever you live, ICE is probably in your city, a citywide alert where knitters show up and just knit and watch what's happening, like bear witness while knitting.
Yeah, okay.
You can knit your red hat while you're doing that, or you can knit your socks or whatever you want, but
that if there is ICE activity,
that actually brings people together and provides like what is really needed by the people in the communities that are getting targeted right now. I also know there are people that have like mobility challenges, don't have access to transportation, all kinds of reasons why you might not be able to like use your body and your hands to like physically help people beyond just knitting or other ways of kind of showing your support. And so again, like, this is not to vilify anybody that chooses to make the hat, or if that is the only way that you're able to engage. It's just openly talking about like, that is a great way to engage that helps you, but there are other ways to engage that maybe will more directly help the cause and the needs of the people who are being the most impacted right now.
And that also just opens my mind to the idea of like craft and community. Maybe that's also a piece that we could do an episode on sometime. But I think that like the crafting can feel kind of isolated, right? It's like something you do by yourself alone. And so this idea of like, here's this thing I made alone in my house and you also made this thing alone in your house. It's like the political version of seeing somebody wearing the same sweater pattern that you have on, where it's like, oh, like we did the same thing. And so, I love your idea of like knitting and being observer. Is that the term? What's the technical term?
Oh, like a constitutional observer?
Yeah, like the idea.
Yeah.
Or for example, that also made me think too, it was just one woman doing it herself, but there was a woman who, when I lived in Pittsburgh, who was an election worker, and she would knit the whole time, like at the election table, getting people ready, like not registered, but getting people signed in so that they could go vote. And the idea of like bringing craft into those political spaces being an opportunity to also take a collective action or to do something that is political and craft related with other people.
Yeah, because I think that's key.
I mean,
the reason why all the internet clashes are not ultimately helpful or like generating anything good, I don't think, because people don't have that actual ability to build as much community when they're fighting in that way.
Yeah, which is, I think that is also what brings me back to that thing I'd said before about there's the thing itself, and then what is the goal or the intention behind the making of a certain thing, the calling somebody out for making a certain thing. Like, what is the goal and intention behind that? That's why the internet's not helpful. That's what I was getting at, right?
Let's just conclude with that one.
So the question of like, what is the purpose behind any of the actions that are being taken? And the blanket statement takeaway is the internet isn't the most helpful place in the world.
So I'm curious to know, especially if you have a marginalized identity, and maybe your voice has not been as elevated around these issues of craftivism. What do you think about all this? Like, how have you thought about the kitty hat, the melt the ice hat, or anything else? And what do you think? Like, would you show up and just knit and be a constitutional observer? Or like, what are some ways that you have found that you're able to help your community, and whether or not that involves your craft?
And that question of, I feel like a lot of our solutions have been in that knitting as political act category, but is there the knitted item as political statement that is an alternative to this? Or are there options for that anybody has that they could share in terms of what they have found useful, or we'll say better, and why? We're curious to hear.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because there is another hat on Ravelry I've seen that is not nearly as popular, that says abolish ice or F ice, like in color work. And
I saw
honestly,
that.
like, I'd be more willing to wear those. I don't know why. Maybe because it doesn't require
it doesn't require a deep knowledge of the knitting world to understand what your message is.
It's just out there.
And I do think that the kitty hat there were non-knitters who knew what that was. And obviously this red hat is getting a lot of press. So I'd be curious, but it's also slightly less distinctive, I would say. But it's like, not only am I telegraphing this thing, but I'm literally only telegraphing it to other people who are on Ravelry.
Well, this was a great conversation. Thank you, Allison. And I have a surprise for you.
I'm ready. I'm excited. I have a surprise for you.
Oh.
Happy about knitting, because with our knit along, I have major developments, but I'm ready for this.
Okay. So it's a new segment, and I'm calling it 2 Stitches Enter, 1 Stitch Leaves.
Which I did know the name ahead of time,
referencing?
and I had no idea what it meant. So just in case there are others who also don't know, the knitting and the Mad Max universe, I don't know what the Venn diagram is, but...
Yes. I mean, I feel like some of you must be fans of the Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. So my husband is a huge fan of the Mad Max franchise. I also like many Mad Max movies. So this is in reference to Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, which is, I think this is like the rule for the Thunderdome. Like 2 men enter, 1 man leaves. So for this new segment, I will be presenting Allison with 2 knitting alternatives, and then maybe we'll talk through each one just briefly after I present it, because we had some comments from some viewers who are less experienced with knitting, wanting to know more about these techniques we're talking about. And then you will choose which stitch will leave.
Which one gets left behind?
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. The first one is chart only versus written instructions. So I'll just
okay. Well,
I was supposed to describe.
No. But my question was, when you said chart only, I thought the next choice was going to be or written instructions plus chart. But are you saying chart versus written?
Yes.
Okay. So
chart with no corresponding written explanation of the charted section. It just says follow chart.
So in knitting you can have
chart, yes.
Mm-hmm. So knitting charts are ways of diagramming the stitch pattern or the color changing that you're supposed to be doing in a pattern, which is like kind of like a grid. And different stitches have different, like a table that tells you, or a key, it's like this symbol means this stitch, and so it can be laid out that way, or with different shading of colors implies using one color or the other, or a third, or however many you have. And so you can get a pattern that has this chart with this information about what you should be doing with the pattern and no words, versus a written pattern. So for example, you can have a chart that indicates knits and purls, or you can have it written knit 2, purl 2, knit 5, purl 6, etc. So those are the choices. And personally, I will pick a chart any day of the week. Big time. Yeah, but that again is very personal. I think charts are super intimidating if you don't know how to read them. And I definitely have in the past done patterns where there was a chart option and I just like desperately read the text like line by, I mean, it can be lines and lines and lines and lines. And I defaulted to that because I didn't know how to read the chart. But for me personally, chart any day. What about you? Now I just want to know what you think though.
Yeah, chart,
I know this is
chart
me.
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think once you figure out how to read a chart, it works so much better for me because the stitches are, they follow lines, like they're stacked up along lines. And so it's so much easier to understand like, oh, there's a purl there, so I need to knit on top of that one.
Exactly. So you're like reading the existing. Yes. Yeah. It requires less reliance on looking at the pattern all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it can definitely be intimidating when you first are staring one down. And especially it's confusing if you're doing like not in the round and you have to like, oh wait, I'm going left
start
to right,
at different
right
sides.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's hard.
But chart life for me. Yeah.
Okay. Next, the next two stitches. Knit flat, a cardigan that's knit flat versus knit in the round and steeked. So a cardigan knit flat, you would
you explain while I think about what my answer is.
You would typically, so if it's like a stockinette stitch like this vest is for the most part, you would have to knit across, and then because it's flat, you turn over and then you purl back so that on the outside, on the right side, it's all knit stitches.
Versus a cardigan is essentially a big single shirt. Open piece. Yeah. And it's open versus a sweater, which is a circle. And so if you want it to be a cardigan.
Yeah, you can, there is a way for you to do it all in the round, and then you cut up the front and divide it into two pieces. So in that case, you would, if it was stockinette, you would just be knitting, doing knit stitches the whole time. But the steeking can be terrifying and intimidating for people, so I'm curious to know what would be your preference.
So I think it's dependent on the pattern. Like I don't, and also because I actually don't mind purling that much. Mm-hmm. So if it's like not color work, I will do a standard knit purl, keep it open situation. But color work where you're using two or more colors at the same time, purling that is very difficult. And so I would rather do that in the round and then steek. I have steeked once and it went great. And it was kind of magic. And I haven't done it again, but I would like to do it again. But I don't hate purling enough to steek if I don't have to. Because then also you get a little bit, I don't know, I think the way that it fits, like when you do cut it, you get a little bit of like a ridge of the stitches that fold under, and then you're also adding a button band. So depending also on like how thick your yarn is, sometimes, I don't know, that can just feel a little bulky and you don't have to have that. So my take is that they both get to stay. Oh, they both leave. Oh, they're holding hands and they're walking out of the Thunderdome together.
No cardigans. That's the rule. No cardigans in the ring.
There you go.
Okay, well, on the topic of flat versus round, swatching in the round versus swatching flat, and it should be fine.
Right. So swatching is when you make a small sample of the thing you're going to make sure that, right, a pattern is written to say you should have 20 stitches in 4 inches of knitting. And if you get that, then you can expect your final thing will be the same dimensions that the designer has said that they will be. But to make sure that you're using the right needles and that you're getting close enough to that measurement, you make a little guy ahead of time in the color or the pattern or however it works. You can do it flat. And again, if you're knitting something flat, that's kind of fine. But the reason to do it in the round is that how tight people's or loose people's stitches are changes when they're knitting in the round. And so if you knit something flat and then you're actually knitting in the round, you might not get the same measurements. What's even trickier to me is that knitting small circumferences in the round also changes your tension. So it's like a small swatch in the round still may or may not tell you what your actual larger thing is going to be. And again, I'm just such a pacifist. I'm like, well, it depends. I can't pick one. So for me, swatching in the round, less maybe helpful for gauge and more helpful for me with color work. Like I have done that color work thing where you like carry the long float behind with a flat one just to see what the colors look like. And I don't like doing that. So I will swatch in the round to see how my colors are going. But otherwise, I'm probably just going to do it flat. But so there are cases where I do want to do in the round. Sorry, this is like such a boring nuance. There's no nuance in Mad
These
Max.
battles,
Is there? I don't know. I've never seen them.
These battles are not to the death.
No, not at all. Womp womp. Well, you'll go next. You'll go next time, and hopefully you'll be a lot more definitive than I am. Yeah.
Okay, I have one more. So this one is fix mistakes immediately or notice mistakes and keep knitting.
Which I feel like everybody can understand. Whether or not you're a knitter, you know this feeling. But I think I can definitively say I will fix the mistake immediately. I feel like with this sweater is a great example. I think I messed up, the way that cables cross. This was the sweater, I think I discovered this. I had crossed one wrong, like way down. And I taught myself how to like completely just take the cable out. So it's like everything out, like rather than pulling it all back, just going down in the cable and redoing it. And truly, I think when you see a mistake and keep going, it's like, there are times where that's the case, where it's like, I'm missing one stitch. I haven't dropped anything. I don't know what happened. I'm not going to go back to the place where I'm missing the stitch and like fix it. I'm just going to like add a stitch here and keep going. Yeah. If I need the stitch count to be right. But fixing mistakes is such a... knitting mistakes is very much a theme of this podcast, is such a valuable skill, and also one of those things. I think you can learn it, and I think sometimes you just have to like be brave and be like, I'm going to try it. And I might drop all the way down and realize I can't do it, and then I will have had to sacrifice that many rounds to get back there. But yeah, so I think I will say, at this point in my life, fix the mistake immediately is winning the battle.
I agree with that. I just fixed a really scary mistake. It was, I made the zipper sweater by Petite Knit.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I ended up doing the collar differently. And I haven't even done the finishing on this sweater because it's so hot in Denver. Anybody that's in the Mountain West right now knows this winter has been awful. So instead of doing the twisted rib, because it was like hurting my hand so much with the yarn that I was using, I ended up just doing 1x1 rib. But then I didn't realize that because you knit the whole thing and then tack it down, like knit it down.
And it was backwards?
And it was the wrong way. Like what should have been the inside, which matters because you have these extra stitches that become like the zipper placket. And so those were on the outside. I didn't realize. So I figured that out as I was like halfway through the sweater. I was like, no. And I just didn't know how it was going to go to like cut that stitch that was attaching the two sides. Because I was like, is that going to make everything unravel from the top? Like what is going to happen? So I put it on like a really small needle, like both sides, and cut it, and it was totally fine. It was totally fine. I figured it out. That wasn't actually the worst part of finishing that sweater. So,
Angeli, what's making you happy about knitting?
I am working on the Traveler's Shawl by Andrea Mowry. And let me see if I can hold this up in a way that kind of shows it. So it has a really cool texture, which you've probably seen if you've seen any of the Traveler series. And it's in Flywheel, I think is the yarn. Yeah, Flywheel by Harrisville Design. So I got this.
So is Flywheel like the name of the base?
So Flywheel is the name of the base, and this color is Penstock, I think. So it's just a black, but it's really like rich and has a lot of different colors going on in it. So it makes for a really interesting fabric, and it just feels good. It's woolen spun, and it's sport weight, which is not a weight I usually knit with, but I really love it, and I want to make a whole sweater with this yarn and like see some of the other colors because they're just like I think really beautiful. The person who owns Ritual Dyes, I think it's called, in Portland, made a version of this in a black, and a lot of the ones that you see in the pictures are with handspun or other like
super colorful,
very colorful, variegated yarns, and so I liked the idea of just the focus is on the texture. And it's really easy to like. I do need the pattern to just look at while I'm working because what row you're on, if you're knitting or purling, if you're increasing or decreasing, like you do need to know that, but it's pretty easy to follow along. So I just have picked up the stitches along the other end and have this last little section to do.
And it's going to be, it's like, does it come in sizes?
It's kind of like a scarf. Yeah.
But it's like bigger.
It's bigger, but not too wide. And this is actually the size 1, the smaller one.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Yeah. And I've gotten into...
You're a real Harrisville head.
I just love their yarns.
I haven't used... I saw them at Rhinebeck, and I went into the booth, and I don't know, I just didn't buy that much yarn. But I would... Maybe someday we'll go.
Yeah, that'd be really fun.
I would like to go.
What is making you happy right now, Allison?
So I have a Lume update that's making me very happy, which is... not fall off the needles here. I guess this isn't a surprise to you because I texted you when I picked the yarn. I was like, is this color going to work? It's so not I'm wearing this kind of orangey color that
looks good.
So this was Reply Rambouillet from Brooklyn Tweed. It was 50% off. It was like there were only a couple colors, and I was like, I don't wear that color, but I want to try this yarn, and I got it, and it was like, what a forced way to like get me outside my comfort zone in terms of colors and to realize I really like it. But again, in that same way, this is not necessarily a color I would usually use.
Ooh.
I wish I could spread it out a little bit better. But it is this, I'm going off the needles. It is Studio Donegal Soft Tweed, Soft Donegal Soft Aran Tweed. But that's my contrast color, is this yellow. So it is like a tweed, but it's very subtle.
Yellow, right?
I'm sorry, yes. The main color is yellow. So it's a very subtle yellow tweed, golden kind of tweed. And then my contrast color, which I was going to use kind of all along, is just Germantown, like Kelborn Woolen's Germantown cream. But the Donegal is woolen spun, so it's got that like not so heavy but like super warm, cozy texture. And after so many iterations of this sweater, I'm so pleased that I like it so much that I've just been like, I kind of have neglected other stuff and I've just been going nonstop on it. And also because I would like to finish it in time to be able to wear it before it's too hot. So I'm very pleased.
Nice. Yeah, I'm on the last sleeve of my Lume, and unfortunately do not have enough of the contrast color to finish the... I have to unravel my swatch, and then I will find out if... I'm 5 grams short. So I'll have to unravel my swatch to see if I have 5 grams of contrast color. I don't think I do, though. So I think I'm probably going to have to buy another ball. And I'm kind of annoyed. I don't know if others have heard this, but I've heard that Sari Norland's yarn estimates are often off because she has testers only knit 1 sleeve before they finish their test. And so it's not always accurate, especially something like this where you do have color work on the ends of both sleeves. It's maybe just not super accurate. So buy extra if you're doing the Lume. Other than that, it's a great sweater, and I'm excited to finish it. And how about outside of knitting? Is there anything that you want to know about other than knitting?
I do, and I was struggling to... I was like, nothing was happening in my life. So I was like struggling to even think of something. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm starting a play next week. Like, I'm an actor, and I'm starting like full production. I'm understudying, which I've never done before.
Not just understudying, you're like understudying.
I'm understudying
both,
2 parts. Right? Mm-hmm. 2 parts that talk to each other a lot. It's like a totally different thing. I think I'm excited. I think I am also terrified, but I haven't done a play in a while, and there's like the imposter syndrome. So I think it's not so much like, you guys don't need to know I'm doing a play, but I think what is worth sharing is like the imposter syndrome's coming in, and the like, you haven't done this in a long time, and it's like trusting that I have the background and the training and the experience to be able to do it after an amount of time, which as being the primary caregiver parent and being somebody who's moved a lot for my spouse's job, the trajectory has not been what I had thought it would be, or I've stepped back. And also it's just a profession where like it's really hit or miss, and like you can be doing it nonstop for 5 years and still not do anything. And it reminded me Did you see the live action Lilo and Stitch?
No.
Okay, well, I found myself bawling in the theater watching it because, and this was not from the cartoon, but in the live action, the older sister had been like a surfer who'd given up surfing when the parents died so that she could take care of Lilo. And Lilo was like bragging to Stitch or something about how she used to train by like carrying, I'm going to start crying right now. How the sister, Noni, that's her name, used to like train by carrying big heavy rocks underwater. And then at the end, when like the spaceship crashes, then she gave it up. So she didn't do it for a long time. And she has to like carry Lilo. And again, in the remake, this is such a digression. In the remake, like water makes him really heavy. I don't think that was part of the original. So she has to carry Lilo like out of the ocean and he's really heavy. And it's like this thing she hasn't done, but that she spent years training to do. And it like comes back to her and she's like able to do it. And I was like, you can do it again. Like I was a mess, but that's how I feel right now. It's like, I've put this thing that I love to the wayside for a number of reasons. I'm doing it again. It feels scary. It will be hard. And I also need to trust that I can do it.
Yeah.
And that is a lesson for everybody.
Yeah.
Or something to think about for everybody. How about you, Anjali?
Yes.
What do you want to yell about?
Well, mine is less personal, but I did watch a documentary that I think that you would like and that a lot of people who watch this podcast would like, called Folk Tales. And it was released in 2025. I had to rent it. I couldn't find it on a streaming service, but it was totally worth it. It is a documentary about this school in Norway where
I like what I'm hearing.
So teenagers who are taking a gap year can attend this school, which I guess is like they're built on sort of this older system of schools that were like out in rural areas in Norway to like educate children living in those areas. So they can go to the school for their gap year and learn Arctic survival skills and dog sledding. Like those are the two focuses of this school. And so you see these teens, they're all like 18, 19, heading out to the school having no idea what to expect. One of the main characters that they follow is this girl who just doesn't seem very confident in herself. She wants to pack 7 mascaras to go to this like Arctic survival high school. And by the end, like she's just come into her own so much that it's super inspiring. I won't go into all the details, but especially if you have dogs or like dogs, like that aspect of it is really special. There is knitting.
Great.
They do that.
Yes.
They build their own shelters. They learn
They're
how
in
to,
Norway.
Like, they kill animals and like skin their pelts, and tan them or whatever all the terms are. I don't know. I haven't
Arctic
gone to
survival
Arctic
skill.
Survival school, but I would like to. So yeah, and they talk, and it's really just inspiring to hear the teachers talk about how they see students grow through learning these like very concrete skills, kind of seeing what the problem is and then knowing that you have the skills to be able to address that problem and then just doing it. And then just being outdoors, and it's all very like cozy, perfect winter vibes for this time of year. So highly recommend
Sign me
it.
up. I'm going to watch it.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. But thanks for watching us.
Yeah. We hope, I feel like we came out real hot with 2 topics that we both are like, okay, here we go. People have really strong feelings. But they both felt, they're very important and relevant and the kinds of things that are interesting to us in terms of what maybe isn't, as we talked about, there is a lot of internet chatter about these things, but kind of going deeper behind them and trying to figure out what's at the base of these things and how do they fit in historically and how can we think about them. We felt like they were both really relevant. So
and
share your thoughts.
Comments so far on our AI episode have been so great,
like
and
thoughtful. Yeah, people have very
and-
different opinions, don't always agree with us, but it feels like for the most part, the way people are engaging, like we've really enjoyed reading them.
So thank you.
And
Keep it coming.
we look forward to what you have to say about this one.
Subscribe, like. Apparently now you can also hype. I don't really understand that, but hype us if you're so inclined.
Sounds like something AI made up.
Yeah. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Grounded